Okay, folks, the purpose of this afternoon's talk, and by the way, it's very, very nice to be here, is just to give you a brief insight in what we do in scientific advice. And in particular, I'm not going to concentrate a huge amount on what's on the web. Anybody who wants to go through formal procedures, it's very well detailed how you make the application, who you contact, whatever. So we'll cover that very, very briefly. What I really want to do is just give you kind of some hands-on information as to what happens at a monthly meeting, what are the do's and don'ts, what helps an SME to get through the process quicker, and kind of some of the lessons that we learned as time went by. So the mandate, as you can see, which we'll just very briefly, and it's up on the web, I mean, primarily it's the first 2 bullet points. We largely respond to you. You send us questions at some issue in product development, and it's often misunderstood that that must be early phase product development. But in fact, scientific advice could be at the first day you think of the idea to the product already been on the market. So it comes in at all phases in the product life cycle. And of course, we do a very similar exercise for the MUMS applications as well, and provide scientific advice, again, maybe with a fee reduction, maybe without a fee reduction, depending on the case. But in addition, then CVMP also sometimes directs us. They may find that in the middle of an assessment, there's a particular technical issue that arises, that they're unsure how to proceed from there. So they might refer the matter to scientific advice, or they might ask us to contribute maybe if a new guideline is about to come on stream. Equally, we also try to direct the CVMP, because the biggest single advantage and the biggest joy of working on scientific advice is that you get all these incredibly novel ideas and novel products. And sometimes with the way molecular biology is going, 15 years ago, who thought you'd be using cytokines in dogs or monoclonal antibodies? So a lot of the guidelines in CVMP policy was never really directed towards that. Now we often tell CVMP, look, down the pipeline, there's these kind of products coming through. You need to devise a new guideline. You need to change your expertise or whatever it is you need to do. And also then maybe that may require a change in the mandate of our working party. And our final main function, of course, is not to act in unison, but also to see are there other interested parties, such as in parallel scientific advice, and we have a formal procedure for that with the FDA. But also, if the CVMP so wishes, we can interact with, obviously, interested parties, industry bodies, whatever, such as today's event. So Karen sitting beside me is the main contact person, and she is Miss Scientific Advice, 2013, 2014, you name the year, okay? She has been, obviously, she's been a phenomenal help to me, because when it comes to trying to chair the meetings, there's a lot of issues going on, and often things arise during the meeting or an hour before the meeting. She's got a huge amount of experience, and I can only also say as well that being Irish, like myself, she's very open, right, very approachable. So the first thing I would say to you is, please, if you have any questions or any issues, she's very receptive to dealing with them, and she's very knowledgeable on the subject. On average, we have, as you can see from the other graphs, the number of procedures is going up year on year. And at the moment now, we're averaging about 35 to 40 procedures. And it takes often several months to deal with each procedure, so the workload for the group is going up and up. And there are 3 main categories of scientific advice that I think it's important you're aware of. The first is the initial or original. So that's the first time you identify a problem. And you come to scientific advice working party and you say, can you advise us on this? Sometimes we send you back an answer, and the answer, and often it's our fault, isn't clear enough, or we've misunderstood something in your question. And you may come back with a request for clarification. And that's usually very quickly after you receive the scientific advice. So that again would be part of the same procedure. And then we also have a thing called follow-up advice. So for example, if the working party advises you to go ahead and do a particular study, you do the study and you get an unexpected result. You may then come back to us and say, hold on a minute guys, this isn't exactly what we all thought we were going to get. What do you advise us to do now? And that would be a follow-up advice procedure, which again is still part of the original advice. Now, of course, it has to be connected. So if your question was on reproductive toxicity and your new question is on a clinical trial, that's a brand new procedure. It's not a follow-up scientific advice. But again, we're flexible and we try to obviously be customer friendly. Which areas are covered? Well, in our mandate, what we're told to do is try to provide guidance to industry when there is no guidance already in existence. So there's a huge number of guidelines which you're all very, very familiar with. And when you read through them, many of your answers may well be actually answered. And this kind of mandate, just to provide advice where there is no current guidance, can at times become a little bit blurry. So for example, we might get a question on a bioequivalence study. And normally we say, well, there's a bioequivalence guideline, just follow the guideline. But a company might say, well, we don't want to do that, okay? We want to change it and modify it. We will listen. We will listen to the scientific justification, okay? And if it's robust enough, we will agree that, yes, we'll have a new avenue of investigation here. But on other occasions, don't be shocked if the answer comes back, look, follow the guideline. There's no new scientific advice coming up here. So all categories of the dossier are open for scientific advice. Obviously, regulatory questions do come up, but we pass them straight on to the agency. So our working party do not debate regulatory issues, and you'll just get an answer from Karen or David or Thea, whoever is primarily responsible for that particular issue. But all other aspects of quality and safety, including MRLs and efficacy, and we get a huge number of requests for clinical trial protocols to advise on the actual study design, populations selected, all that kind of stuff, and it does form a large part of our work as well. You will see when you look up on the web that the cost you're going to be charged, if you are charged, and again, being SMEs, obviously you get a 90% fee reduction once you're registered. And if I was Tesco, I'd be saying that is phenomenal value, okay? Getting us for 10%, guys, you really have no idea. But there is, some people say, why does the cost keep going up if I have quality questions as well as safety questions? And in reality, guys, it isn't a punishment. It's just down to the fact that it takes longer and more experts have to be brought into the procedure. So there is a cost implication involved at the coordinator side and also here in the agency as well. And as I said, we're very keen on parallel scientific advice. Seems absolutely nonsense to us if you're going to launch in the US and launch in Europe that you won't have both parties talking to each other, agreeing a common principle. And what we hope to achieve by that is maybe one common clinical trial. So no need for, oh, I need US data, I need European data. Can you agree on a common trial that will save industry money and reduce the amount of experiments that need to be conducted? Now, a question that often comes up is the question is, okay, thank you very much for your scientific advice. Is it binding? And I'm going to divide this into two categories. I'm going to divide it into you and us. In general, when it comes to you, it's not. You can take our scientific advice and say, thank you very much, boys and girls. It was very interesting to read, but we don't agree with it. And we're going to go ahead and do our own thing. And that's absolutely fine. The legislation totally and utterly allows that. But don't be surprised when you actually do put in the full application if you're asked to justify why you deviated from the scientific advice. Now, this does occur. And there's no insult taken. Nobody starts getting angry because you ignored our advice. We just want to know why. What was the reason? And very often, SMEs and other companies come up with a very valid reason why they changed and didn't take our own advice, and that's absolutely fine. But the big query and worry for industry is that we'll advise you to do something. And then 3 years later, when you put the application in, we say, we've changed our mind. So is it binding on us? Now, legally, when you look at all the actual definitions, it is not 100% binding on us. But this is one point I really want to emphasize. CVMP and the Working Party always accept that if we give you scientific advice and you act in good faith, we're more or less morally bound to accept that you did what we told us to do or what we told you to do. So the reality is it is very rare that CVMP will go back on a scientific advice. The only thing I put up there about advances in scientific knowledge, let's take an extreme case. Let's say you're making a vaccine and you put an antigen into the vaccine and we say that's fine. And 3 years later, it now becomes obvious that in fact that antigen is in no way related to the disease. Then clearly we have to change that scientific advice. But if I told you to do a diagnostic test and a new one became available a year later, I'm not going to lose sleep over that. You did what you were asked to do, you acted in good faith, and CVMP will always accept that in good faith. So although legally it's not definitively binding, in effect it's very rare that we do not accept the scientific advice that we gave you. Composition. It's one of the strange working parties of CVMP in that all members of the group are actually members of CVMP. So you're getting right into the mindset. You have half the CVMP already thinking about your product from an early stage in product development. And that's a big advantage of the particular working party. So again, group size is about 14 to 16. We obviously ask people with different areas of expertise, such as PK, PD people, immunologists, whatever. So we've got a good mix of talents. And if we have a particular application that comes in that we don't have that talent or expertise, we then go looking for it. And there are many ways we can actually find it. We can find it in other members of CVMP, other working parties, find it on our colleagues working on the human side, on their working parties or the agency. We will make every effort possible to get the right people to give you the best advice that we actually can. But just so you know that we're not running off on a tangent from CVMP, all advices, all the answers we give you come back to plenary CVMP and they're formally adopted. So it is the actual, you have the stamp of approval of the entire group. Now, one little pilot project that I do want to make you aware of is at the moment, don't be surprised if over the next year or two, you get the offer, would you like to have a, what I would call a participating pilot procedure? And in this, what I mean is that prior to formal adoption of the scientific advice, CVMP will adopt it in draft form and give it to you for you to review. And maybe say, here's 60 days. Look at the advice we've given you and look at the answers. Have we taken on board what you wanted? Have we understood correctly? And if we haven't, tell us so that we can change it into the final draft that we will then adopt at a subsequent CVMP meeting. And one of the rationales for this is that some companies told us in the past they don't like coming back for clarification. They think that maybe it's insulting or it shows they don't understand, whereas if they had a draft report to comment on, they'd find it much easier to do. So if you are asked over the next year or so, whatever, just to participate, know where that's coming from. It's just trying to get a better understanding and lead to a more successful conclusion. So the reports that come to the group are on a timetable of 30, 60 or 90 days. And of course, industry always wants it as quickly as possible. In general, it's normally a 60-day procedure. Now, clearly, that doesn't mean that we take 60 days, but we have to formulate the report and distribute it and get comments and so forth. So on average, it will be a 60-day procedure. If there's a particular problem, for example, a really complex issue or we need novel expertise, we may have a clock stop. And in some cases, we may even invite you in for an oral hearing. Now, it's not routine that you would be invited in for an oral explanation, but if there's any particular situation where we honestly feel that talking to you is going to help us finalize the report better and quicker, we will invite you in. So it's entirely possible that if you wish, or if we wish, whatever, okay, an oral hearing can take place. What do we do to try and actually have a special SME emphasis? And we do. Everybody sitting around the table knows that whatever the struggles of big pharma are, they're often much worse for small companies. So we take on board the fact that we have to try and tailor what we offer to give them the best chance of success. And this at times, and I'm not trying to be in any way insulting here, but some of you work for small companies that may just even have one pioneer product. And at times, it's a make or break product. If you get a license, fantastic. If you don't get an authorization, it could be the end of the company. So we do take that on board, and we know that obviously a lot of these smaller SMEs or startup companies may have some brilliant scientists, but people who don't have a lot of regulatory experience. So again, we do try to adopt an issue of showing you what the pathway is. There are just 3 comments I put up there, which I just want to make sure we're all crystal clear. These are absolutely not true. The first one is people feel embarrassed. If I look for advice, maybe the CVMP will think that we just don't know what we're talking about. And I mean, that's just, I won't even go further. It's just nonsense, okay? Second one is that your big pioneer product that you're working on is going to get out. Now, in all the mob movies, you've seen the mafia have this code of silence called omerta, okay? We don't quite have omerta, but we have a similar policy, okay? I can absolutely guarantee you there is not one iota of a chance. The rules and confidentiality are so watertight. If you make an application, it stays within the 4 walls, end of story. And the final issue then that comes up is the issue of regulatory creep, as in we want to get our tentacles into you guys as quickly as possible. We want to see what you're doing. All I can say is, guys, I have enough problems in life of my own, okay? So wanting to investigate everything that you're doing, whatever, is not high on my agenda. There's no question of regulatory creep. We just find that with good scientific advice, things move an awful lot better. Sorry. So very often I say to companies that scientific advice, in effect, is a bit like an insurance policy. And the whole point is you've put a huge amount of blood, sweat, and tears, not to mention money, into your project. You've eaten it, you've slept with it, you've done everything. And now to fail at the final hurdle, because the studies that you did were not what CVMP would require, really would be kind of a disastrous situation. So what I like to think is that you're getting inside the head of the regulators. Even if you don't agree with them, at least you know the way that they're actually thinking. And that's really important if in next year, the year after, you're going to make a product application. Clearly, of course, we're really keen under legislation to avoid any repetition of animal experiments. So the 3 R's principle is very important as well, and we find that scientific advice can help to reduce the need for any repetition of studies. But finally, in addition to you getting inside our heads, whatever, okay, we also get inside your heads. And there are many things and many products you guys work on that we don't have a huge knowledge of. We've never worked with them in the past. And therefore, we need to understand what the problems actually are out there. And if we do understand, then I put it up there, shock horror, could regulators even develop empathy? I'm going to let you in a little secret. Regulators have feelings too, okay? And at times, subliminally, if I know what your problem is, and 3 years down the road you put in the application, that's at the back of my mind. I knew there was a problem with the clinical trial. I'm actually far more likely to understand it and be sympathetic to it if I knew what it was all along. So making us aware of what the issue is often can actually work out to your benefit as well. This has got the unbelievable sensitivity in this. Okay. Now, one thing I want to say is what we do and what we don't do, okay? In effect, guys, we do not actually write protocols for you. Don't write in and say, please tell me how to do my clinical trial. That's not what our job is. Our job is to actually see what your plan is and then to comment on it and critique it for you. So very often, for example, we'll get questions where we'll say, yes, we agree with your primary efficacy criterion, or we don't agree, or do this test or do that test. But what we don't want to do is kind of get questions like, tell us exactly what data package we need. Or one other question that may arise is the benefit-risk balance for our product positive? In reality, guys, a benefit-risk balance occurs on the last day of the product application, okay? Until I know what the risks with your product are, I haven't got a clue if the benefit-risk balance is positive. And finally, this idea of, will you review all of our data, say in reproductive toxicity, and conclude that the molecule has no reproductive toxicity? Again, that's an assessment, okay? So what the point is that we don't actually assess data within a scientific advice procedure. Now, I say per se. Of course, if you send us in a bank of data, we may look and say, right, for example, in the example I've given, you write in and say, I've done 2 in vitro mutagenicity studies and 2 in vivo studies. They all comply with the VICH guideline. Can CVMP agree with us that no further genotox data is required? We say, yes, that's fine. But we haven't assessed it to say that it's negative. You're telling us it's negative. So our answer often would be, subject to us agreeing that it's negative, we agree that no further data would be required. But we're not going to come out and say, yes, we agree this molecule is not mutagenic, or this molecule is not teratogenic. That occurs during the actual application. So then what are the major challenges that we face? You've got enough challenges trying to get the product up and running, whatever. We also have problems as well. And that is that at times you guys are really, really pushing the boundaries. You're coming up with pioneer products, which at times are so novel. We have no experience, no precedent whatsoever of working with this product. And that, of course, causes us not only scientific headaches, but also potentially some regulatory headaches as well. Sometimes as well, the question, even though there may be different questions, there's a mixture of legal, scientific, regulatory questions which are absolutely intertwined, right? And therefore, we're in a little bit of a quandary what to do. Now, of course, we have got this pool of experts that I talked about, so we can seek additional expertise elsewhere. But another weapon in our arsenal, and one that, again, is going to be talked about a little later on by Fia, is the idea of the Innovation Task Force. This started up on the human side many years ago and has now just been extrapolated onto the veterinary side. And what it actually represents is if you think you've got a very novel product, which there's nothing else on the market, or there may be some particular problem, you make contact with the agency at the earliest possible point. They will then normally organize a meeting where they'll put together a group of people who will be particularly selected for your product or your problem to try and advise on which would be the best way forward. So this is the Innovation Task Force. Now, sometimes they may say, no, that's straightforward, just go for scientific advice. But on other occasions, they might decide that your product is so unique, it requires a different plan. And that's where the real advantage to us and to you is. Because if we know in advance, we can make the plan. We can decide who we need and what we need when you come in for scientific advice 6 months down the road, or when your product application comes in 18 months down the road. So what I would encourage you to do, and I said, please listen to what Fia has to say later on, is consider the whole concept of the Innovation Task Force if you have something particularly novel, because it may help to better direct which pathway you need to go down. The other challenge, of course, we have is we've got to be consistent. And therefore, we always try to keep even a mental database or a formal database or repository of our advices to make sure that what we say to one group isn't different to what we say to another person later on. And finally, then, the nice part. I can honestly say the scientific advice is my favorite part of CVMP because, as I said, you just sit back and wonder in amazement at what some of the companies are actually developing out there and the advances that are taking place in veterinary medicine as well. Now, when I work in the university, as I always tell the students, and every lecturer will tell you this, you never feel old until the day you retire. Because when you're surrounded by young people constantly challenging you, whatever, it always makes you feel young. Same goes with scientific advice. When you come in and it's not another non-steroidal or another antibiotic, but something really novel, it is what I call mental Botox. And okay, it just keeps your mind turning over, and it does actually form a very good part of it. I don't want you to get the impression that we quite break out the champagne and the cigar after every scientific advice, but there have been a couple of ones that have been particularly challenging, and the actual desire to do so has always been there as well. So finally, the final message that I would just like to drive home to you today is the working party and the CVMP actually gets, we fundamentally understand that if there is a good collaboration on scientific advice between industry and ourselves, we're probably going to both achieve our goal of improving animal health, animal welfare, and the availability of products. And again, if you look at the scientific advice procedure, a load of small niche areas have now been filled, products for which we had absolutely nothing. They've been novel, They've come through the procedure, they've gone through full applications, and they're now successfully authorised as well. What we find is that if it works well on both sides, projects finish quicker, they're cheaper, and there's less repetition of experiments. And that, of course, is in everyone's favour. And I can only say, both from the point of view of the Scientific Advice Working Party and certainly the point of view of the agency staff as well, our appetite to achieve that goal is absolutely huge. So on the basis of that, I just thank you all very, very much for your attention, and I enjoyed it. Cheers.